Hello and welcome to a new series of Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Riches and we reconvene after a very busy summer, locally, nationally and internationally. The coalition government has had to respond to the invasion of nations in the Middle East and Ukraine, its own members of parliament defecting to nationalist parties and the potential breakup of the nations of the United Kingdom itself. Locally, Hull seeks Lebensraum, the Humber energy sector seeks preeminence as the fastest growing sector of the British economy, and the people of Grimsby may now proceed at more than jogging pace down Peaks Parkway. To discuss some of these issues, I'm delighted to be joined by Austin Mitchell, Labour MP for Great Grimsby. Austin, thank you so much for coming in as ever.
Pleasure.
Let's start with matters in your own constituency, the Shoreline tower blocks. Shoreline
I would propose to pull down the tower blocks. I think this was a silly decision. It's imposed sneakily and I think without proper and full consultation. It's a wrong decision. Shoreline is responsible for housing people, not pulling down the accommodation and giving them an uncertain future. It's going to be an expensive operation. And I would like the council to get involved because the council is the housing authority and therefore should scrutinise this decision, see what it means in terms of alternative accommodation and in terms of finance. The council has to have a say. I think the leader of the council was daft to say he would like to exercise the plunger himself and blow them up. Well, I think the council has to consider it. But I'm going to ask Shoreline to reconsider. I don't think they can go ahead with this. It's wrong. The people in the tower blocks don't want them to be pulled down.
Well, Shoreline, Tony Bramley of Shoreline said that they did poll, they did have a vote of the residents, and 58%, a majority, wanted to.
Well, I don't think that's correct, actually. I think the consultation was a fallacious one. Certainly, the one tower block where I've had a meeting, which was Nelson House, overwhelmingly, they did not want it to be pulled down. And I've today received a numerous delegation from other tower blocks. They don't want it to pull down either. So let's have a proper consultation and let's have a proper forecast of what's going to replace this accommodation. You could do a partial pull down. You could pull down Duncan Place, for instance, which is a bit of an eyesore, and replace that with more modern housing while keeping the tower blocks. Let's not rush into this.
Is this a sort of matter of housing going full circle? Back in the 50s and 60s when they demolished the terrace houses and built tower blocks, that turned out to be a disaster of a social experiment. Now, in reverse, the idea of getting rid of the tower blocks and replacing them with ground level accommodation again.
Well, the 60s were the fashion of the 60s. They built tower blocks then because they wanted to house more people on high. And they were built because the architects and the planners that design them didn't want to live in them, but there are people who do want to live in them, and it's noticeable that luxury developments are now building tower blocks for people to live on high with a view.
Well, they are the only penthouses in Grimsby, aren't they?
Why not simply improve our existing tower blocks, give them concierges? It might be more expensive to run, but they'll be more habitable and better, and they'll provide for the needs of the people. That's what we've got to do.
But Shoreline is a charitable organisation. It has to be responsible for how it spends its money. If it's more expensive to house people in the tower blocks and less efficient, would their responsibility to those who provide money be to...
I am not convinced by their calculations. It's going to be an expensive operation to move people, to pay them £4,000 to move out, to provide alternative accommodation and to finance the move. That's a huge expense. They're going to lose the revenue for whatever masts and transmission equipment is on the roof. And they're going to lose all their investment that they've made in repairs they have done. So let's see the calculations. The council needs to go over the calculations in its scrutiny committee and see whether it works. I don't think it does.
Another infrastructure issue in Great Grimsby, in your constituency, the speed limit change on Peaks Parkway. This is a vast 2-3 lane boulevard with no pavements either side or buildings and high walls protecting it. Have they been recklessly outrageous to raise the speed limit on Peaks Parkway?
Well, I'm confused by this because the police said they didn't want the speed limit increased and that a 30 mile an hour had reduced accidents and now they're going to increase it. And this is just after my wife was fined for speeding at 38 miles an hour in a 30 mile an hour zone. So aside from the vested interest, I think it's sensible, provided people behave sensibly. I think for the council leaders to say, well, it's up to them if they get fined, nothing to do with me. Well, again, a silly statement.
But when you say vested interests, I mean, what are the vested interests that would keep the speed limit so low?
Well, it was designed to bring people to work to the centre of Grimsby quicker, to get quicker access to the A180, and it should serve that purpose. 30 miles an hour in patches, people come zooming in faster, and then you're suddenly caught by the averaging system. Well, there will still be speed checks, but the average now will be higher. It'll be 40. I think that's fair enough. It's manageable.
Chris Shaw said of it that if people get caught by the speed cameras, they shouldn't come bleating to him. Chris Shaw, that's leader of North East Lincolnshire Council. As our political local shepherd, should he not take cognizance when his flock bleats to him?
It's the job of the shepherd to hear the bleats of the people.
It is indeed.
And to act on them.
Talking of sheep, let's go to a slightly larger issue here. You've recently come back from Scotland and the referendum there.
They're not sheep, the Scots.
They're not sheep, the Scots, but they do own a lot of sheep. What did you think of the result there? It was
Well, I was
not
excited
as
about
close as some people expected.
I thought it was a very exciting election campaign. If I'd been a Scot, I'm not Scottish, but if I had been, my wife is, I'd have voted for independence and home rule, because a small democracy, I think, is a healthier and more open and a fairer democracy. But I'm not. I'm a British Labour MP, and I see this as a threat to the North, because we need the support of Scottish MPs to have a Labour government and to achieve the kind of social reforms we need in Britain. So I don't want them to be stopped from voting in the British Parliament, nor do I want, as Cameron is proposing, to have the voting powers of Scottish MPs who remain reduced on
English issues.
Stop them voting on so-called English issues. Very difficult to draw a line. We've had a United Kingdom and united voting by both blocs on the same basis, members of one parliament, since 1707. Why change it now, apart from party political motives, which I think is motivating Cameron?
The argument would be, I suppose, that if the Scots have these extra rights and the Scots have this extra subsidy of about £4 billion a year, the Barnett formula, £1,500 a head more spent on Scots than there are on the English. The English are upset that they don't then have the equivalent devolution for their own. And whether or not the argument is a fair one,
yes.
there's a statistic from the
I
British...
can see that argument. That's the West Lothian question. But you can't answer it by having an English parliament, because that would be dominated by London and the South East. You can't have it by having only English MPs voting on English issues for the same reason. It would be dominated by London and the South East. If you're going to have devolution to Scotland, and I think they should have Devo Max, which they were promised. That's why they voted no, a promise of more devolution. Then we should have devolution in the north as well, and in English regions. What we need is equality of devolution. Then all MPs can vote on all British issues.
If there were to be that equality of regional devolution, and the north of England were to be as autonomous as Scotland is now, for say, then would there then not also need to be another Barnett formula that effectively London and the South East will simply be subsidising the north?
That's their job. Now the fastest growing and the richest part of the economy, it's their job. We're an economy where things have got to be equalled out, and the contributions have to come from the richest part, just as Germany makes the biggest contribution to European countries, so London must make the biggest contribution to the north and to Scotland. It's the richest, it must pay.
The Mayor of London...
And we still need, we can't have a situation in which the spending of local authorities in this country is being cut as drastically as it is, so that all services, libraries closing, Central Hall closing, all the facilities that make the life good being diminished to give more money to Scotland. We've got to have equality of funding. That means a substantial degree of devolution to the north and to the cities.
Just quickly on that, Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, said after the referendum in Scotland about the Barnett formula that he didn't mind the Barnett formula as long as it enriched the people of Barnet in London. There is a thought that if, as you say, it is the job of London to subsidise the rest of the country, that London itself will wish to be independent. London itself will wish to be an independent city-state, unshackled from the burden of paying for the rest of the country.
Well, is that no happier solution? Let's cut it off.
But where would the money come from for the rest of the country unless it was a London overseas aid budget?
It is the job of London as the wealth generator to support the rest of the country, whether it's through the Barnett fauna of Scotland or through government spending for local authorities to support local spending here. That's the job of London. In the north, we were the richest part of the country. We generated the Industrial Revolution. We, in the north, generated the wealth of this country, and that subsidised London. That subsidised an empire. That subsidised a world trade. Now it's their turn to subsidise us.
One more note on the Scottish referendum. It was the return of Banquo's ghost, as it were, it was the return of Gordon Brown, who played a wonderful game in the final days of the referendum. Is this the sign of Gordon Brown returning to British politics?
Well, it was a good thing. I think Gordon Brown's speech was very powerful, and he is largely, I think, responsible for the victory of the No group. But I don't think it augurs a return to Scotland. If he does return, it should be as leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, not in this country.
That's he said that he doesn't want to do that, of course, and perhaps who can blame him? Austin, we're going to have to stop there. Thank you very much. Please join us in a moment after this short break, and we'll be talking to Austin Mitchell a little bit more about the Labour Party conference last week. See you in a moment. Welcome back to Hot Topic. I'm talking to Austin Mitchell, Labour MP for Great Grimsby. Austin, you've just come back from Scotland. You've also just come back from Manchester and the Labour Party conference. Was it a happy conference?
Well, it was a wet conference. It rained badly in Manchester, so I wasn't too happy with that. It was a nice conference. It's nice to see old colleagues and unite with old friends, but it didn't have the kind of excitement and impetus that I would have hoped for a pre-election conference. I mean, it really needed to be a launching pad for enthusiasm and energy and a drive towards victory. In fact, it was a statement of responsibility. We are a very serious, responsible party, and we'll take good care of the public finances, and we shall be responsible, and we won't increase taxes, and we shall be very nice, and you'll have kind of Osborne light as an economic policy. Well, that's not good enough. I would want it to be more exciting than it was. It was solid, it achieved a lot, but it wasn't exciting.
Is there a generational thing on this point of the excitement and the power of communication of the conference? Ed Miliband made a mistake, which was in forgetting a couple of things, which is a presentational issue rather than a matter of substance. But the fact is that the young men in their 40s and 50s who are running the Labour Party now do not make the blood run in heat in the same way as a speech by Michael Foot or Neil Kinnock or Eric Heffer, if you're of a generation that remembers those fantastic speakers, those wonderful orators.
That's true. Some of them actually made my blood run cold, but I think the days of oratory are dead, and we have to accept it that Ed Miliband is no actor. I mean, Blair was a superb actor, moving.
But he was always the juvenile. He was always the juvenile lead, Blair, though, wasn't he? He was never Brutus on the rostrum. He was always more Bambi than Brutus.
He's solid. He's full of good ideas. He's a nice man, and he's the right leader.
Miliband
he's not a magician. He's not an actor, and he doesn't know how to eat bacon sandwiches in public, which is part of the art of a leader. I trust Ed Miliband. I wish I was more excited by Ed Miliband, and he has a kind of hapless side. I think it's largely his advisors are telling him, be cautious, don't say this, don't say that, watch your words. Appear statesmanlike at all times. And that doesn't capture the mood. The mood is for change, and we aren't providing it.
Well, to some extent, it's because he's the boy who went to the chess club rather than was the first in the batting order, wasn't it? I mean, there's nothing that one can do about his own presentational skills, whether or not they have anything to do with the ideas that he's presenting. So
the best speech was Bill de Blasio, who actually, at the conference, the mayor of New York gave them much the best speech at our conference.
Mayors and ex-mayors of New York have been in the news last week for all sorts of reasons. Just get down a little bit to the detail of what policies did come out of the conference. There was a policy that so often is incomprehensible from Ed Balls and Ed Miliband, that the continuation of paying down the deficit, at the same time as not having any higher taxes, or very few and very specific, and yet providing more services. Now, it's paying down debt, not having a greater income and having a greater outlay. Doesn't seem to make sense.
It does make sense because you can shift resources around, and one of the reasons why the deficit is increasing is the burden of misery. Actually, if you're paying out more in unemployment benefit and in housing benefit because you're moving people into more expensive accommodation through the bedroom tax, then expenditure goes up. There's always a cost to a recession. The answer to recession is not the kind of Osborne-light policies of punishing the people. It is to borrow and to spend, to stimulate. And that way the Keynesian multiplier comes into operation. For instance, we're talking of building 200,000 houses by 2020. We actually need far more than that. We need to build at least 100,000 council houses, not by 2020, by 2016. Now, if you build those houses, you put people back to work, they buy things, demand goes up in the shops, and there's more money around. That's the way to cure the deficit. Stimulate the economy so we've got growth and people have got jobs and they're paying taxes, not be paying them dole, housing benefit, and various ways of cushioning the present austerity.
You mentioned housing, and the idea of the mansion tax came up at the other end of the housing scale from public housing. All houses over £2 million are to be massively taxed in order to raise money for the NHS.
How much is your house worth?
My house, I wouldn't know, I rent, I'm afraid. But it's certainly not 2 million. I doubt there's a house in Grimsby that's worth 2 million.
There's a house in Grimsby that's worth over 2 million.
Well,
there's a house in Hull.
Exactly. But
it's worth over 2 million. This is a tax which will fall mainly in London, it's true.
Yes.
But it's right, isn't it?
But, well,
I mean, we can't tax people because of the massive tax evasion machinery we've got, particularly with the help of the big four accountancy houses helping people to fiddle their profits and their incomes through the Channel Islands and through tax havens.
Well, we'll come back to that.
We can't tax that, so we have to tax the visible symptoms of wealth.
Symptoms of wealth.
We could have a higher rate of VAT, for instance, on Bentleys and Rolls Royces and Jaguars and Rovers. And we could have a mansion tax. A mansion tax, 2 million, that's a huge value for a house. It's not going to affect 90% of the people. Oh. So those people who can afford that kind of house can afford to pay more.
Well, firstly, the mansion tax, Ed Miliband suggested that it would be ring-fenced for the NHS, as protection for the NHS. But even if you have a generous idea of how many houses in the country are worth more than £2 million, that tax would only bring in about £1.2 billion a year, which practically pays for the NHS pillow cover budget.
There are other sources of revenue for the NHS. We should provide more money for the NHS. It could provide it, for instance, by dealing with by levies on the tobacco companies and on those companies that have been profiting from the present austerity.
Austin, you said a moment ago that if people can't afford to pay the mansion tax on £2 million houses, they sell up and move to a smaller house. That's almost a kind of land reform, isn't it? A redistribution of land.
No.
I only mention it because one of the things that came out of the Scottish referendum is that 50% of the privately held land in Scotland is owned by fewer than 400 people. That seems like a strange ratio. Doesn't land reform seem rather unattractive?
Well, it's ludicrous. It's not built on either. It's just used for shooting pheasants and deer and poor animals that happen to be up there and renting it out to be able to kill them. No, I think I have no sympathy for the £2 million householders. The council tax system is, let's face it, very regressive. It starts too high and it doesn't, in the higher bands, it doesn't go high enough to make people pay. People that have the wealth, they should pay.
Moving on to just a further national political story. Over the summer, Douglas Carswell, a Conservative MP, decided to defect to UKIP, resign his seat in Parliament and stand again in his constituency at Clacton, which UKIP thinks is a very ripe seat for their sorts of voters. Clacton has a great deal in common with Grimsby, doesn't it? Does Grimsby not seem like a...
Well, there's a great deal of discontent all over the country. It's not just Grimsby. I mean, we have now an electoral system in which a third of the people are Labour, a third are Tory, and a third are just fed up of both parties. And from that third, the miserable and happy third, UKIP is drawing support. It's channeling it into kind of undesirable policies, in my view, anti-immigrant policies and regressive policies. But it is responding to a popular discontent. It's up to the Labour Party to fire those people because their interests lie with Labour. Their interests lie with a party which creates jobs, which rebuilds the economy, which expands growth, which gets us back to where we were before, when we had a more equal and a fairer society and a mixed economy. That's the job of the Labour Party. And if people don't vote for it, well, I think, you know, they'll suffer the consequences.
Well, what is the temptation that is offered to these people by UKIP? Is it specifically a well worked out judgment about the value and the use of the European Union to the United Kingdom? Or is it just people who think they're paying too much tax and there are too many rules that they're being told to follow?
Oh, I think it's a generalised discontent. Their life has changed, and you know, we've knocked down their kind of society with free market economics and globalisation, big corporates that aren't paying tax, and higher unemployment and lower benefits. Society is meaner, nastier, and harder, and they're responding to that. But the answer is to grow and to expand the economy, to get back the ground we've lost, not to exclude immigrants. I would agree with them to the extent that certainly the European community, the European Union is a burden on us, and Labour should be consulting the people in a referendum to ask what they want to do about it, and that we can't renegotiate the common agricultural policy, which costs us about £20 a week in food prices, or the common fisheries policy, which has ruined Grimsby, unless we threaten a referendum, because that's a stick that will break European resistance. So we should have a referendum. The people should be consulted, but it's not the burning issue. The burning issue is getting our economy back to growth, so we can have jobs, economic growth, public spending, improve the quality of life.
Are you worried about UKIP as a threat, specifically in this constituency with your...
No. Labour will win Grimsby. Grimsby's interests are with the Labour Party. Our interests
you had quite a small majority last
are
time.
with a party that believes in public spending, believes in a fairer division of society.
Austin, I must stop you there.
I'll give you a long tirade.
Thank you very much, Austin Mitchell, as always. I'm afraid that's all we have time for this time. I'll have a new hot topic for you next week. I hope you'll join me then. For now, goodbye.